The hotel lobby was glowing with golden light, its tall chandeliers spreading warmth across the marble floor. Guests in fine dresses and polished shoes moved about with glasses of wine, their laughter echoing against the high ceiling. In the middle of it all stood Elias, the quiet doorman, dressed neatly in his simple uniform. His hands rested by his side, his posture straight, his eyes calm. He had worked in this place for years, and to him it was just another evening. But tonight would be different tonight. Someone had decided to make him the center of attention. The millionaire walked in with his usual arrogance. His steps were loud, his smile sharp. He was known for his wealth, his power, and his cruel jokes. He loved making others feel small. He thrived on it, and tonight he saw Elias, the doorman, standing there like always. The millionaire's eyes lit up with mischief. He wanted entertainment, something to make the crowd laugh. He wanted to humiliate the man who opened doors for him. And so, with a sly grin, he raised his voice so everyone could hear. "Play for me and I'll marry you," he said, laughing. "If you can impress me, I'll give you everything." The words sliced through the air, sharp and mocking. The guests turned their heads. Some chuckled softly, some whispered to one another. The challenge was ridiculous. Everyone knew it, after all. Elias was just a doorman. He was there to serve, not to entertain. For a moment, silence fell. Elias didn't move. His face showed no anger, no fear. He simply looked at the millionaire with steady eyes. The crowd waited, expecting him to shake his head, to walk away, or maybe to stammer nervously. That would have been the usual scene. The powerful man laughing, the servant shrinking, but Elias surprised them. He did not refuse, he did not stumble. He gave a small nod, calm and quiet, as if the words carried no weight. And in that instant, the room shifted. The guests stopped smiling. They leaned in, curious. Was he really going to accept this challenge? The millionaire laughed even louder. He thought the doorman's nod meant foolish bravery. To him, it was a game, a trick to make the night exciting. "Good," he said, clapping his hands. "We have ourselves a little show." His friends smirked. Raising their glasses, the air buzzed with expectation. The doorman was walking into a trap, and everyone knew it. The piano in the corner of the lobby stood quietly. Covered in a thin layer of dust, it had not been touched in years. It was only there for decoration, a reminder of the hotel's grand past. No one could imagine music filling this space tonight. Not from a man who spent his life holding doors open. Elias moved slowly. He did not hurry, his steps were steady. His uniform looked plain compared to the shining gowns and black suits around him. Yet something about his calmness unsettled the crowd. He did not look like a man about to be humiliated. He looked like a man who knew exactly what he was doing. Whispers spread quickly. "What does he think he's doing?" one woman murmured. "Does he even know how to play?" Another laughed under her breath. Some leaned forward eagerly, hoping for a disaster they could remember and gossip about later. The millionaire folded his arms, already imagining the embarrassment, already savoring the victory. But Elias was not focused on them. His eyes flickered once toward the piano, then back to the floor. His face gave nothing away. He had lived through nights darker than this, through struggles far heavier than mocking laughter. This moment was nothing compared to what he had endured before. And still, the challenge hung in the air. It was more than just music. It was a test of dignity, of pride. The millionaire thought he had trapped the doorman into a joke. But Elias understood something deeper. He knew this was a chance, not to win or lose, but to show that a man cannot be measured by the clothes he wears or the job he does. The lobby was silent now. The waiters stopped moving. The clink of glasses faded. All eyes were on the doorman who had just agreed to play. The crowd didn't know it yet, but they were about to witness something unforgettable. The millionaire had started this game to humiliate a man, but in doing so, he had lit the spark of a story that would soon turn against him. And so, in that grand lobby, under the golden lights and the curious stares of the wealthy, a quiet doorman prepared to step out of the shadows, not with anger, not with pride, but with something far more powerful. Elias had always been there, standing by the tall glass doors of the hotel, greeting guests with a polite nod. He blended into the background so well that people barely noticed him. To them, he was just another doorman, a man whose job was to smile, open doors, and stay invisible. But no one ever wondered who he really was or where he had come from. He arrived at the hotel years ago, quietly asking for work. The manager had seen something steady in his eyes. something reliable, and gave him the uniform. From then on, Elias became part of the place, opening doors for the rich, carrying luggage, and listening silently as people passed by. He was like a shadow, always present, never speaking too much. Guests often ignored him. They walked past him without a glance. Sometimes they tossed him a tip. Sometimes they didn't. Some treated him kindly, but many treated him as if he wasn't even human. He never reacted, never showed pride or pain. He simply bowed his head and carried on. But what no one knew was that Elias had once lived a very different life. Long before he wore the doorman's uniform, he had been someone else. Someone whose hands once touched not brass door handles but ivory piano keys. His world had once been filled with music, concerts, applause, and the bright lights of stages. Elias had been a pianist, not just any pianist, but one who could bring tears to the eyes of strangers with a single piece. In his youth, he had traveled to cities where people lined up to hear him play. His name had been printed on posters, whispered with admiration. He was not wealthy, but he was respected. His talent was a gift that people admired. But life has a way of changing course without warning. Tragedy struck like a storm, and Elias's world collapsed. A terrible accident stole someone he loved deeply, someone who had always been there to cheer for him in the audience. The pain was unbearable. Every note he played after that felt like a knife. His music, once alive and full of beauty, became heavy with sorrow. For a time, he tried to keep playing. He forced himself onto stages, but his heart was gone. The applause felt empty. The lights were too bright. He wanted silence. He wanted to disappear, and so he did. He walked away from that life, leaving behind his career, his fame, and the world that once knew his name. He found himself wandering from place to place, searching for peace, but peace never came. Eventually, he took the job at the hotel. It was quiet, it was simple. No one asked questions. No one expected anything from him except to stand and serve. And perhaps that was what he needed, to live as a shadow, to bury the man he once was. To the guests, Elias was just the doorman. To his co-workers, he was polite and hard-working, but distant. He never shared stories, never spoke about his past. He lived with discipline, rising early, ironing his uniform, and moving through his day like clockwork. At night, when the city outside was filled with noise, he sat alone in his small room, staring at the ceiling, remembering the sound of music that used to belong to him. Sometimes, late at night, when no one could hear, Elias would hum to himself, soft melodies that once moved crowds. His fingers would twitch as if searching for keys that weren't there. He never touched a piano again, not in public, not in private. The sight of one was enough to stir the ache in his chest. He had buried that part of himself, locked it away where no one could reach it. Yet the truth of a person never really dies. It hides, it waits, it lives in the quiet corners of the soul. Elias may have worn the uniform of a doorman, but the spirit of the pianist still lived in him. His silence wasn't emptiness, it was depth. His stillness wasn't weakness, it was control. And though no one in the Grand Hotel knew it, they were standing beside a man who had once touched greatness, a man who had stood on stages where people wept at the beauty of his art. They saw only a doorman, but behind those calm eyes was a story heavier than most could imagine. So when the millionaire threw his cruel challenge, when he demanded Elias to play, the world thought it was a joke, but fate was strange. For years Elias had hidden his past, but now the time had come for it to surface. His secret was about to step out of the shadows, and the world would see that the quiet man in the uniform was far more than they believed. The millionaire loved to play games with people. His money gave him power, and he used that power not for kindness but for cruelty. To him, humiliating others was entertainment. He believed that poor men existed only to serve him, and if they made mistakes, it was his right to laugh at them. That night in the hotel lobby, he had found the perfect target in Elias, the quiet doorman who rarely spoke. The challenge was not meant to be serious. It was never about music. It was about turning Elias into a clown for the crowd. The millionaire's voice had carried through the air like thunder. "Play for me and I'll marry you," he said. The words dripped with mockery. The guests chuckled, some covering their mouths with their hands. They knew exactly what the man was trying to do. He wanted to break the dignity of the doorman. The piano stood at the edge of the room, an old thing left behind as decoration. Its lid was half open, the surface covered in a faint layer of dust. It had not been touched in years. The millionaire had chosen his trap well. He believed the doorman would be too embarrassed to try, or worse, that he would sit down and fail miserably in front of everyone. Either way, the rich man would win, the crowd whispered, their voices low but full of excitement. They leaned toward one another, hungry to see what would happen next to them. It was like a play unfolding right before their eyes. The stage was set, the victim chosen, and the cruel joke already underway. They waited for the moment when Elias would shake his head, maybe stammer nervously and walk away in defeat. That was the ending they expected. That was the ending the millionaire wanted. But Elias had nodded. He had accepted the challenge without hesitation. That single gesture unsettled the room. The laughter paused for a second, replaced by curiosity. The millionaire frowned slightly but quickly forced a grin. He clapped his hands and shouted, "Good! Then let us all enjoy the show." His friends laughed again. Though not as confidently as before, Elias moved toward the piano slowly. His steps echoed softly on the marble floor. The lobby, which had been filled with chatter moments ago, grew quiet. The guests' smiles began to fade, replaced with something else in an uneasy anticipation. They had expected him to back down, yet here he was, walking calmly into the heart of the trap. The millionaire leaned back against a chair, crossing his arms. He felt safe. He believed there was no way the doorman could surprise him. After all, he thought, talent belonged to the rich. Art belonged to those who could afford lessons. What could a man in a uniform know about music? His confidence was high, but a small flicker of doubt had already begun to stir in the back of his mind. As Elias approached the piano, the whispers grew louder again. "Does he even know how to play?" one guest murmured. "This will be embarrassing," another laughed softly. Some guests felt uncomfortable. They shifted in their seats, wondering if this was going too far. But no one spoke against the millionaire. No one dared. His wealth and power silenced them all. The trap was perfect in his eyes if Elias refused. The crowd would laugh at his fear. If Elias tried and failed, the crowd would laugh at his shame. Either way, the rich man would have his joke. His pride would grow and the doorman would shrink into nothingness. That was how the millionaire saw it, but Elias's face gave nothing away. His expression was calm, almost unreadable. He did not seem nervous, he did not seem angry. He was simply moving forward, as if every step carried purpose. His silence was heavier than words. It made the guests uneasy. It made even the millionaire shift slightly in his seat, though he quickly hid it with another smirk. When Elias finally reached the piano, the room fell into complete silence. The air was so thick that one could hear the faint crackle of the chandelier lights. All eyes were fixed on the man in the uniform. The millionaire's grin widened. He thought the silence was proof that the trap was working. He thought the tension in the room was the delicious wait before the humiliation. He could already imagine the laughter that would explode when Elias struck a wrong note. But he did not know the truth. He did not know who Elias really was. He did not know that the man he tried to humiliate had once played for thousands, that his hands had once told stories through music, that he carried within him a depth no amount of money could buy. The trap that the millionaire had set was about to turn into his own downfall. At that moment, as Elias stood by the piano, ready to sit, the entire lobby seemed to hold its breath. The millionaire thought he was in control, but in reality, he had unknowingly given the quiet Doorman the stage he had been running from for years. The cruel challenge was supposed to break Elias, but instead, it was about to awaken the truth that had been buried deep inside him. Elias stood in front of the piano, his hand brushing lightly across the dusty wood. The instrument looked tired, forgotten, abandoned in a corner of the grand lobby. To the crowd, it was nothing more than decoration. But to Elias, it was something else entirely. It was a door to a past he had locked away. For years, he had avoided pianos. He could not walk past one without feeling the sting of old memories. The weight of loss pressed into every key. It had been easier to live as someone else, to stand quietly at the hotel doors and let the world think he was just a doorman. But now, standing before the piano, the old fire in his chest stirred. His fingers tingled as if they remembered what his mind tried to forget. The guests watched closely. Some leaned forward, eager for his failure, others whispered. Confused by his calmness, the millionaire smirked, his confidence growing again in his mind. There was no way a man like Elias could play. "Go on," he said mockingly. "Show us your talent." His voice carried the sound of arrogance, but there was a small tremor beneath it that he didn't notice. Elias lowered himself onto the piano bench, The wood creaked softly. His posture was straight, natural, almost regal, and for the first time, the crowd noticed something different. The way his hands hovered over the keys was not the way of a beginner. There was discipline in the way he sat, a quiet authority that did not match the uniform he wore. Whispers grew louder. "Look at his hands," someone murmured. "He sits like he's done this before." The room began to shift. Doubt crept into the faces of the guests. The millionaire noticed it too, and his grin faltered for a second. He quickly laughed again, louder than before, trying to drown out his own unease. Elias closed his eyes for a moment. He let the noise fade. He let the weight of the lobby, the chandeliers, the stairs, and the cruel challenge drift away. In his mind, he was no longer a doorman. He was back on a stage, the lights dimmed, the audience waiting, his heart beat slowly, steadily. Then his fingers touched the keys. The sound that came was soft at first, almost a whisper, but it carried through the room. The piano had been silent for years, yet under his touch it awakened. The guests gasped. They had expected noise, clumsy notes, something laughable. Instead, they heard music that was alive, delicate and powerful at the same time. The notes flowed like water, smooth and effortless. Elias did not look at the keys. He did not need to. His hands moved with memory. With years of practice buried deep in muscle and soul, every sound was filled with emotion, sadness, longing, beauty. It was more than just music. It was a story. The crowd sat frozen. Their laughter had vanished, replaced by silence. Some leaned back slowly, their eyes wide. Some felt their throats tighten, moved without knowing why. The millionaire shifted uncomfortably, his smirk gone. He had planned to humiliate Elias, but instead, he felt something strange and a weakness. As if the music was cutting through his pride, Elias continued to play. The world outside the lobby did not exist anymore. In that moment, it was only him and the piano. He poured years of pain, years of silence into every note. He remembered the nights he had sat in darkness, refusing to play. He remembered the faces of those who had once cheered for him, and the one face he had lost forever. The music carried it all. The sound rose higher, stronger, filling every corner of the grand room. The chandeliers seemed to tremble, the marble walls echoed. The people who had come expecting a cruel joke now sat in awe. Some clasped their hands together, their eyes wet with tears. They could not explain why, but the music touched something inside them. The millionaire clenched his jaw, his face grew pale. He tried to laugh again, but the sound caught in his throat. He realized now that Elias was no ordinary man. He had not just accepted the challenge, he had transformed it. The stage was no longer the millionaire's trap. It was Elias's triumph. When Elias finally opened his eyes, he did not look at the crowd. He looked at the piano, at his own hands. For the first time in years, he felt whole. He felt alive. The uniform on his body did not matter. The whispers of the wealthy did not matter. What mattered was this moment, the truth that could not be hidden anymore. The crowd remained silent. No one dared to speak. They had expected a humiliation, but instead, they had witnessed a revelation. The doorman they had overlooked for years was not who they thought he was. He was an artist, a master, a man whose spirit could not be crushed by tragedy or by arrogance. And as the final notes hung in the air, trembling softly before fading into silence, the people knew they had seen something unforgettable. The millionaire's trap had failed, and in its failure, it had revealed a secret far greater than anyone had imagined. The moment Elias pressed the first note, the air in the lobby changed. It was not just sound, it was something deeper. The soft vibration rolled across the marble floor and rose toward the chandeliers. The guests who had been waiting for a laugh suddenly froze. Their smiles faded, replaced with surprise. The piano, once thought to be a forgotten decoration, had come alive under his touch. The note lingered, warm and haunting. It was not loud, not rushed, but it carried weight, as if it had been waiting for years to be released. People leaned forward without even realizing it. Drawn toward the sound, they expected mistakes, broken notes, something clumsy, but instead they heard confidence, they heard mastery. Elias's fingers glided from one key to another. He did not hesitate, he did not look nervous. He moved like a man who had been born for this. Every motion was smooth, natural, and filled with control. The crowd was stunned, they whispered, but their voices were weak, almost guilty. It felt wrong to talk over music like this. The millionaire, sitting with his arms crossed, shifted uncomfortably. His grin had disappeared. His chest tightened as the sound grew richer. Stronger, he wanted to laugh, to dismiss it, but he couldn't. The music refused to be ignored. It filled his ears, his chest, his mind, reminding him of something he had never felt before. Elias played not just with his hands, but with his heart. Each note carried a piece of his story, a part of the life he had buried. There was sadness in the sound, but also beauty. There was loss, but also strength. The music spoke where words never could. It reached places inside the listeners they didn't even know were there. Some guests closed their eyes, letting the melody wash over them. One woman felt tears slide down her cheeks without warning. A man gripped the arm of his chair, stunned by the emotion pouring from the keys. It was more than entertainment, it was more than skill, it was truth. The first note had opened a door, and now the music rushed through, filling the room like a storm of emotions. The people forgot they were in a hotel. They forgot about the millionaire's cruel challenge. In that moment, they were simply an audience, powerless against the beauty of the performance. Elias sat tall, his face calm, but his soul was burning. He had run from the piano for so long, afraid of the memories it carried. Yet now, sitting here, he felt alive again. His fingers moved with freedom, as if they had been waiting all these years to return. The music was not planned. It flowed from him naturally, like breathing. The millionaire's friends glanced at each other nervously. They had come expecting a joke, but now they felt small in their seats. One of them lowered his glass, ashamed to drink in the middle of something so powerful. Another shifted his eyes away from Elias, unable to meet the truth in the man's music. The arrogance in the room was fading fast, replaced by awe. The lobby itself seemed to transform. The chandeliers sparkled brighter. The marble floors reflected the golden light. The hotel had always been a place of wealth and display, but now it was a stage. The piano was no longer furniture. It was alive, and Elias was its master. The first note had been the spark, and now the fire spread. People who had dismissed Elias as invisible, who had walked past him daily without a glance, were now held captive by his talent. He was no longer just a doorman. He was something far greater. He was a reminder that greatness can live in silence, waiting for the right moment to be revealed. The millionaire clenched his fists on his lap. He wanted the music to stop. He wanted to regain control. But with each passing note, he lost more of his power. He had given Elias the stage, and Elias had taken it fully. Turning humiliation into triumph, the trap had backfired, and the rich man could feel his pride shattering with every chord. And yet he too was caught. Though his heart resisted, the music still touched him. He felt it pressing against the arrogance inside him, reminding him that money could not buy this. Power could not command this. This was humanity, pure and undeniable. The very thing he thought he controlled was slipping away from him. As Elias continued, the guests sat in silence. The room had become a sanctuary, every person connected by the same sound. They were witnessing not just talent but truth. They were witnessing a man reclaim himself. The first note had been the door, and now they all walked through it with him. When the melody rose higher, stronger, the crowd finally realized they were holding their breath. They exhaled softly, almost in unison. As if afraid to disturb the spell, the millionaire lowered his gaze, hiding the flush of his face for the first time in years. He was not the center of attention. He had been replaced by the very man he had tried to humiliate. And it all began with a single note. One sound that silenced a room, changed the air, and reminded everyone present that a human being cannot be measured by money, uniforms, or cruel jokes. Greatness reveals itself when it chooses, and when it does, it cannot be stopped. The music grew stronger, filling the entire lobby like a wave. What had begun as a cruel joke was now turning into something no one could laugh at. The people who had gathered to see Elias fail were now sitting quietly, their eyes fixed on him. It was as if the piano had stolen the power from the millionaire and handed it to the doorman. At first, some had chuckled, covering their mouths, waiting for mistakes. But the chuckles died quickly, replaced with silence. Then came awe. The notes carried pain, beauty, and hope all at the same time. The crowd felt emotions they could not explain. A few guests leaned back in their chairs, their faces softening. A woman dabbed her eyes with a napkin, surprised at her own tears. The millionaire shifted in his seat. His arms were no longer crossed. His smirk had vanished. He had wanted laughter, but the sound of Elias's music was too powerful to fight. He tried to convince himself it was nothing special. Just a trick, just luck. But deep inside, he felt the truth pressing against his pride. This was greatness, and it was unfolding right in front of him. Elias played with ease. His hands moved quickly, but not rushed. Each note was clear, sharp, and filled with purpose. He was not only playing music, he was telling a story. The guests could feel it. They could hear the sorrow of loss, the weight of silence, but also the strength of a man who had survived it all. The music lifted them, broke them, and healed them at the same time. The crowd's mood had shifted completely. They had come expecting to see a servant humiliated, but now they felt small, ashamed even. They realized they had looked at Elias without ever truly seeing him. They had seen only his uniform, not the man inside it. Now they could not look away. The lobby had become a stage. The golden light of the chandeliers seemed brighter, as though the hotel itself was honoring the moment. No one dared to speak, no one dared to laugh. The once buzzing room was silent except for the music. It was no longer a game, no longer entertainment. It was something sacred. The millionaire tried to force a grin again, but it was weak. His friends avoided his eyes. They knew the challenge had backfired. They could see that the man they called a doorman was more than all of them combined in that moment. Their glasses of wine sat untouched, their arrogance shrinking under the weight of Elias's music. Every guest could feel the change in the air. The energy of the room had shifted from mockery to reverence. Elias had not raised his voice, had not demanded respect. He had simply played, and in doing so, he had taken control of every heart in the room. One man whispered, almost to himself, "He's not just playing, he's living it." A woman beside him nodded slowly, unable to find words. Another guest pressed his hand against his chest, as if steadying his heart against the emotion that surged from the music. These were wealthy people, powerful people, yet in front of a man they had once ignored, they now felt powerless. Elias's face was calm, his eyes half closed. He was not playing for them, he was playing for himself, for the life he had lost, for the pain he carried, for the soul he had tried to bury, and yet in sharing that with the piano, he was giving it to everyone else too. They could feel it, they could not escape it. The millionaire's throat was dry. He wanted the music to stop, but he also could not bring himself to interrupt. If he spoke now, he would look weak. If he laughed, no one would laugh with him. He realized with horror that he had lost the room. He was no longer the man in control. Elias was. The crowd sat forward, desperate not to miss a single note. Each sound seemed to stretch time itself. They were no longer guests in a hotel lobby. They were witnesses to something extraordinary. They forgot about their wealth, their pride, their titles. In that moment, they were all the same. Just humans listening to another human pour out his soul. As the music swelled, some people closed their eyes, letting the sound guide them. Others sat frozen, eyes wide, unable to believe that the man they had walked past for years was capable of this. A doorman had turned into a master. A shadow had turned into a light. And when Elias reached a softer part of the melody, the room seemed to breathe again. The guests exhaled slowly, as if waking from a dream. Their faces were softer now, some even smiling faintly. They were not mocking smiles, but smiles of respect, of admiration. The millionaire slumped in his chair, pale. His own game had destroyed him. He had wanted to make Elias small, but instead he himself had shrunk. He felt the eyes of the crowd burning into him, reminding him of his own arrogance. He had promised marriage as a joke, but now his words felt like chains wrapped around his pride. The transformation of the room was complete. The laughter and cruelty were gone, replaced by awe. The man they had thought invisible had become unforgettable. Elias had not needed anger. He had not needed revenge. He had only needed music, and with it he had turned humiliation into glory. The final notes of Elias's music drifted into silence, soft and lingering. They hung in the air like the last glow of a sunset before night falls. No one moved, no one spoke. It felt as though the entire lobby was holding its breath, afraid that even a whisper might break the spell. Elias sat quietly, his hands resting on the keys, his face calm. He had given them everything, and now it was over. Slowly he rose from the bench. His movements were graceful, unhurried. He stood tall in his simple uniform, the same uniform that had made him invisible for years. Yet now, standing there, he seemed larger than life. The crowd did not see a doorman anymore. They saw a man who had just shown them the depth of his soul. The millionaire sat frozen. His mouth was dry. His hands clenched tightly. He had set this trap to mock Elias, to make him look small, but the opposite had happened. The irony of it crushed him. His own words echoed back in his head, "Play for me, and I'll marry you." The crowd had not forgotten those words either. They remembered every syllable, spoken loud and clear in arrogance. Some of the guests glanced at him, their eyes sharp. Their expressions said what they dared not speak. He had promised in front of everyone, and now Elias had delivered far beyond what anyone thought possible. It was no longer a joke, it was a debt, a vow made in pride but bound by truth. The millionaire's pride screamed inside him. He could not possibly go through with his words to marry a doorman, to tie himself to someone he thought beneath him. The very idea burned his ego, and yet, he knew the crowd would not let him escape so easily. He had been the one who had challenged Elias, and Elias had answered in a way that no one could deny. The room, once filled with laughter at the doorman's expense, was now heavy with expectation. No one dared laugh, no one dared mock. Instead, they waited, eyes moving between Elias and the millionaire. The silence was louder than any sound, pressing against the man who had once controlled the room. Now he was trapped in his own arrogance. Elias did not demand anything. He did not point at the millionaire. He did not speak a word. He simply stood there, calm. As if the matter was no longer in his hands, he had played, and that was enough. His dignity was intact, his spirit unbroken. He did not need to fight for respect, because respect had already been won. The millionaire, however, was shrinking. His chest felt heavy, his face pale, his confidence was gone. He could feel the weight of every eye in the room pressing against him. The cruel joke he had made was now a noose around his pride. He wanted to escape, to laugh it off, but the music still lingered in the air, reminding everyone of the truth they had just witnessed. The irony was merciless. He had thought he could use his power to embarrass Elias, but in the end it was he who had been embarrassed. He had wanted the doorman to bow lower, but now he himself was the one lowered. His wealth, his arrogance, none of it mattered anymore. Not when a single performance had stripped him bare in front of all. Some guests exchanged quiet looks. They would tell this story later. Whisper it across parties and gatherings. The tale of the arrogant millionaire who challenged a doorman and lost. His reputation was no longer untouchable, it was cracked. And the crack had been made by the very man he thought beneath him. Elias gave a small nod, a polite gesture, and turned away from the piano. He walked back slowly, calmly, not rushing. His dignity followed him like a crown, invisible but undeniable. He did not look at the millionaire, he did not need to. The silence of the room spoke louder than any confrontation could. The millionaire sank deeper into his chair. He wanted to vanish, to disappear into the floor, but he couldn't. His words had trapped him, and his arrogance had destroyed him. The irony was cruel. The very thing he had used to mock Elias had turned into his own downfall. When Elias returned to his place by the hotel doors, he simply stood there as if nothing had happened, as if he were just doing his job. But everyone in the room knew something had changed forever. The doorman was no longer invisible. His secret talent had shattered the image they once had of him. And for the millionaire, the moment was unbearable. He had been the richest man in the room, the most powerful, yet now he felt poorer than anyone else. Elias had nothing but his music, and yet he had left the crowd richer than they had ever been. The millionaire, with all his wealth, was the one left empty. The irony weighed heavy. He had tried to rise higher by humiliating another man, but instead he had fallen lower than he had ever been, and all it had taken was one performance, one moment of truth. One doorman with a secret talent that money could never buy. The lobby was silent, but it was not the silence of boredom. It was the silence of awe, of respect, of something unforgettable. Elias stood near the hotel doors once more. The same place he had stood 1,000 times before. His uniform was still plain, his face still calm, yet now everyone saw him differently. He was no longer just the doorman. He was the man who had filled the entire room with music and left their hearts trembling. The guests whispered softly, afraid to break the moment. Some shook their heads in disbelief. Others smiled faintly through wet eyes. The performance had ended, but the feeling of it lingered inside them. It was not just the sound of the piano they remembered. It was the truth it carried. They realized they had just witnessed something rare, something that could not be bought or sold. The millionaire sat slumped in his chair, pale and defeated. He had been the loudest voice in the room before, the man who thought he owned the air. But now he was silent. His arrogance had been shattered. and the weight of his own words crushed him. He could not laugh, he could not sneer, he could not even stand tall. For the first time in years he was small. But Elias did not look at him. He did not demand anything. He did not remind him of his promise. He did not seek revenge or victory. He simply gave a small bow to the room, a humble gesture, and stood quietly once more. It was as if he was telling them that dignity is not in shouting, not in demanding, but in simply being true to oneself. The irony was heavy in the air. Everyone knew that Elias had won without trying to win. He had not come to claim anything. Not fortune, not marriage, not fame. He had only answered a cruel challenge with honesty. And that honesty had been more powerful than wealth. More powerful than arrogance. The guests began to clap. At first it was soft, hesitant, then stronger, louder, filling the lobby with sound. They were not clapping for entertainment. They were clapping for the man himself. For the spirit he carried. Elias gave another small nod, but his eyes remained calm. He did not bask in the applause. He did not seek their praise. He simply accepted it quietly. The millionaire could barely lift his head. Each clap felt like a blow against his pride. Each cheer reminded him of the truth. He had wanted to humiliate the doorman, but instead, the doorman had revealed him to be the fool. And worse, Elias had not even tried to destroy him. The humiliation came only from the weight of his own arrogance. In that moment, the crowd understood something deeper. They saw that humanity's strength does not lie in money, nor in titles, nor in status. It lies in the quiet fire inside a person, the part of them that cannot be bought. Elias had been overlooked for years. Treated as invisible, yet with one performance, he had reminded them of what real greatness looks like. Some of the guests would never forget this night. They would tell the story again and again. How a doorman silenced a room of the wealthy with nothing but his talent. How he answered cruelty with grace. It would spread beyond the hotel walls, whispered in circles where the millionaire once commanded respect. His story would fade, but Elias's would grow, and yet, Elias himself did not chase this. He returned to his post, standing by the door as he always had, his back straight, his hands steady. He had no need for fame or recognition. For him, the music was enough. It had always been enough. What mattered was that for one night, he had let it out again. He had shared it, and in doing so, he had freed himself. The millionaire remained seated, unable to rise. He had promised marriage as a joke, but now his words were chains. Everyone remembered them. Everyone waited to see what he would do, but Elias never demanded it. He never even mentioned it. That was the final twist of the knife. Elias did not need the promise, did not need the wealth, did not need the power. His victory was already complete. By showing restraint, by showing dignity, Elias proved something greater. He showed that revenge was not necessary. His silence spoke louder than anger ever could. His music had already given the lesson. Humanity cannot be measured by uniforms or by money. Humanity is measured by the fire inside, by the ability to rise above cruelty and still remain whole. The guests saw it, they felt it. They respected him now in a way they had never respected the millionaire. They realized they had been blind, and the truth was finally clear. The doorman they had ignored every day was the one who had taught them what true greatness looked like. Elias remained quiet, standing tall. The applause eventually faded. Replaced by whispers of admiration, the moment would pass. The lobby would return to its ordinary life, but the story would never leave their hearts. And though the millionaire would spend years trying to erase the memory of this night, it would follow him like a shadow, reminding him of the time he tried to humiliate a man and instead revealed his own emptiness. Elias had no need to claim victory. He had no need to claim anything at all. His music had done it for him. His dignity was untouched, his spirit unbroken. The flame of humanity burned bright in him, and for one unforgettable night he had shared it with the world.